Hi everyone, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here with a card class, and this is another in a series of several videos featuring Penny Black's newest collection of Scenic stamps. And in today's video we will be using this beautiful and very elegant stamp called Homeward, and I will be showing you two different techniques that you can use with this stamp. The first technique will help you create something as shown here, and this features some watercolor techniques. And the second, if you aren't a fan of watercolor or you just want to get double the use out of this stamp, features some great ink blending techniques to create this bold and vibrant scene. Now, before we begin, I just wanted to mention that I will have a full supply list up on screen at the very end of the video, and this will show all of the supplies used for both of these cards, including the stamps, the dies, ink colors, everything that I'll be using will be included in those supply lists. So to begin, we're going to start with the ink blending technique, and I'm stamping in my Misty Stamp Positioning tool on a smooth white cardstock, and I am inking my stamp here using some archival inks, and this is the mini size. And I've chosen these inks because I love these colors, and I also really love the size. When working with these scenic stamps, this size makes it possible to get into smaller areas without getting the ink in places you don't want it to be. So I first started by putting down a very light green towards the central and bottom portion of this stamp. And then on the outer edges, I am adding some yellow, some of this gorgeous sunflower color. And for this technique, you can really use whatever inks that you like. Just pick the colors that you like and what you have in your stash, because we will be sealing all of these with some embossing at the end. So it really does not matter which colors that you, or which types of inks that you use for this technique. I'm just going in here now with a darker green and adding some shading using that ink pad, just lightly using sort of the side of the ink pad and tilting it so I can just apply it along the very edge of that road. And if you get any ink in places you don't want it, you can just kind of wipe it off with your finger, or you can use a dry paper towel to remove that before you do your stamping. You can see with this beautiful image how when you start layering up these colors, how it just automatically comes to life. It is so gorgeous, and there's something elegant to me about the way that road goes off to the distance and then this gorgeous tree. Now, to do some of this inking on the stamp for very selective and small areas like the trunk of the tree, I am using my Arteza Real Brush pens. You can use any of your water-based markers to do this, like your Zig markers, Tombow dual brush pens, distress markers. Just pick whatever you have in your stash and you can get the color right onto your stamp. And then I wanted this to be very bold and dark, so I actually, after stamping it, colored directly onto the paper just to darken that up even more. I'm also using the same color to color the fence. Now you can see I didn't have to worry about inking up the fence or that trunk when I was doing the green colors. It was fine to stamp them in green because here I'm going over them with a much darker color. So you don't have to worry too much about that when you're applying the ink with those ink pads at the very beginning. Here I'm just getting this a little bit of this horizon line. And then we can move up now into the tree. So I kind of started with that darker color with those branches at the bottom, and now I'm going down in with my greens from the top, working my way down. And you can see how those just start to blend really nicely together. And I'll just darken this up just a little bit more down here at the base. If you find you have a very harsh line where one color of your ink stops, you may want to just dab the edge of that with a paper towel before you stamp it, and that will kind of soften the edge and help you blend from dark to light. And I'm so sorry there behind my head. I was just coloring some of those branches in with my marker directly onto the paper. And you can see there I'm actually just softening the edge of that, inking with my fingertip. That way you don't have just a dark line where it stops. Now before the next step, I'm going to clean my stamp. I want to be sure I don't move it within my stamp positioning tool. I've just sprayed it with water and am wiping it down with a microfiber towel, and then also making sure it's dry. I haven't moved my paper on the right hand side either. I'm just going to pat it here with an anti-static bag. And now I'm going to ink up my stamp with some Versamark ink. And this is just a clear sticky ink that will allow me to do some embossing right on top of all of those colors we have already stamped. Now there's a lot of detail, and this is a fairly large stamp, so I'm just going to ink this and stamp it a couple times. I probably didn't need to, but I'm just in the habit of making sure before I continue on and stamping it a couple of times. Then I will remove this from my stamp positioning tool and sprinkle it with clear embossing powder, and I will heat to set. And what that's going to do is seal in all of those colors that we've already stamped and allow us to apply our inks on top, and all of the areas that have been stamped and embossed will resist now these inks that we're applying to our background. Now for the background, I am using dye inks, and I am going to use some Wendy Make Art blendable dye inks and some Memento inks to do my background. You could also use distress inks. Like I said, any dye inks will work because they will be resisted by that embossing that we've already done. For my sky, I am just using a piece of scratch typing paper along the horizon line just to mask that off. If you're worried about holding that while you're applying your inks, you could use some masking paper or the sticky edge of some post-it notes. But I find it's just easy to hold it there. If it slides a little, I just slide it back up. I'm starting with my lightest color, and if you find you often when you're doing ink blending you have sort of dark smudges or areas where it doesn't look very smooth or even, it may help to put a very light layer down first, and sometimes that helps hide any imperfections as you move in with your darker colors. So here I'm coming in with a darker color. You'll also notice I'm starting on that scratch paper and then working my way up. I'm barely tapping that onto the ink pad, and that way I don't get too much ink onto the sponge before I put it onto my paper. I am using a combination of Ranger ink blending tools with foam pads and Sukaneko jumbo sponge daubers. Either one works great. Now I'm just going to turn that paper the other way while I work down on the grass. And I'm just very lightly putting some of that color down, checking how I like that with the sky, with that horizon. And I just love how with very simple stamping and basic inking, this entire scene just starts to come to life. Now right over the top of that, I am just putting a very light touch of this sunflower ink. This is actually an archival ink, not a dye ink. I grabbed the wrong one. There is a Make Art blendable dye ink, and that's what I would recommend. I just happened to grab the wrong one there. I am using a fingertip sponge dauber when I applied that yellow, and then this is a Ranger detail blending tool, and it's just a little sponge on the tip of this tool, and it can let you get in these very small areas like I'm doing right here. You can almost color on your ink using this tool. I'm just adding that little bit of shadowing and onto the road. Now I'm going to just buff off any excess ink from that background, and then to finish off this card I used a very small sentiment from our snippet stamp set over on the left, and there's also some really cute sentiments included in some of our other sets, like this lovely birthday. Sometimes you might want to check those for just a small sentiment you can add to your card, especially these Scenic cards sometimes don't need a very big sentiment. To finish this off, I just added a very simple frame around the outside edge, and this finished card is just slightly smaller than a 5x7 note card. Now for the next card, I followed the same inking techniques with the archival inks, only I am stamping onto Canson 140-pound watercolor paper. Now when I added my marker details, which is what you'll see me doing here, I am using the Faber-Castell Stampers Big Brush pens. And the reason I've chosen these particular markers now is because this is going to be painted with watercolors. So any of the inks that you use or the markers that you use, you're going to want them to be archival and waterproof. So the Ranger archival ink pads, the mini ink pads that I've used, and now these markers, these are going to be waterproof, so I can paint right on top of all the parts of this stamping without it bleeding or blending when I add the watercolor layer. Now there's some texture to this watercolor paper, so it's a little bit harder to get really exact stamping, especially with markers on these small details like this fence. So if after you've stamped it, you can go right directly to your paper with your marker just to add that detail in. Now to paint this, I'm going to use my Sakura Koi Field Sketchbox watercolors, and I wanted something a little bit different for the sky. I loved how the stamping on this just turned out very light and soft, so I decided to go with sort of a vintage light and soft look here on the sky. So I just put down a little bit of brown to begin with, but then I decided, oh, I think I want a little bit more color. So on top of that, I will add some more color, kind of a sort of a sunrise or sunset look to the scene, and you can really play around with your skies with these stamps. It's very obvious what it is, that it's a tree and a ground and a road. So if you want to experiment, you can really do some non-traditional colors in the sky because it will still make sense no matter what you put in the sky. So here I've dropped in just a little bit of some red, and I will give that more of a coral look as I continue blending. So you can mix and blend your colors while they're on your paper as long as that is still wet. You can go in and sort of drop in other colors and move them around and mix and blend them together. I keep a dry paper towel handy, so if I do anything I really don't like, I could quickly just pat it and remove some of that color. Now I found I added that green just a little too soon and it was starting to blend up into the sky. So I dried that with my heat gun, and then now I'm going to go back in with the green and it will not go up into that sky area. With the grassy areas on this, I also kept things very simple, just a very light touch, and just by adding a little bit of painting to the sky and a touch onto the image and the ground, this scene is complete. And it looks like you took a lot of time to hand paint the entire scene. And when this card was finished, it just had just a very lovely touch. And I think this lovely vintage touch, I think this stamp would be great for thinking of you, even sympathy cards, masculine cards, summer or springtime birthday cards, and I actually think it would be fun to do this tree in lots of oranges and reds for the fall. Now to finish off this card, I die cut my stamped and painted panel with the stitch nested frame shown on the left. I've also included our leaf stitched frames over on the right. This is one of our newest die cut sets. And then for this card, I stamped the small sentiment from the lovely birthday set shown on the right. So again, I just wanted just a touch of a sentiment on this, but nothing that took away from the overall look of the scene. Here you can see that finished card. This is a standard A2 size card, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So you can see with this large stamp, you can do a variety of different sizes of cards. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, Twitter, as well as our website and blog, and I will link to all of those for you down in the YouTube description box below. And if you stay tuned, here is the supply list for the first card we created, and the second one will be up in just a moment. Thanks for watching.